Good evening, all. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Very Worshipful Brother Gord Echlin. Very Worshipful Brother Echlin joined Maple Arch Granite Chapter 61 of the Royal Arch Masons in 2007. He was advanced to the Master Mason degree later that year and exalted as a Royal Arch Mason in 2008. In 2012 and 2013, he became Worshipful Master of St. John's Lodge 63 in Carleton Place. He was first principal of Maple Granite Chapter in 2013-14 and in 2014 to 2015, and is currently the Scribe Ezra, which is the equivalent of the secretary's position. Gordon joined the Order of the High Priesthood, Annorum Council number 2 in 2013, and is currently president of the council since 2019. In 2015, he was appointed Grand Master of the First Veil in the Grand Chapter of Canada in the province of Ontario. He was also invited to join St. Justin's Conclave number 18 of the Red Cross of Constantine and received the Red Cross Order in 2016. He is currently the treasurer and the second aide-de-camp. In 2018, Very Worshipful Brother Echlin was appointed Grand Standard Bearer of the Grand Lodge of Canada in the province of Ontario. In 2019, he joined Gedaliah Council number 16 of the Royal and Select Masters. Very Worshipful Brother Echlin has been the York Rite Liaison Officer for Ottawa District 1 in 2017, 2018, and in 2020. I would also like to mention on a personal note that Gord has been my mentor through my own journey through the York Rite. He's been a wonderful role model who has opened my eyes to the Masonic world beyond craft masonry. And although our paths have not been identical, I've really enjoyed sharing our experiences together. He is, as we say in the York Rite, one of my very excellent companions. That said, I'll now leave the floor to Gord Echlin.
Well, thanks a lot, Steve. And it's been a pleasure being in the chapter with you for these few years. It's been excellent. Well, I'm just going to use a real presentation here, everybody. So if you let me know if, Angus, can you see that properly?
It's all correct.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see that, a lot of people that I know in Freemasonry, and I understand there's a few people who are looking to join Freemasonry, and that's what this presentation is aimed at. So I'm here about to talk about some of the Masonic orders that exist outside of the Craft Lodge that you've already been introduced to, I'm sure, in what is sometimes called the York Rite. That is really more of an American term. We don't call it the York Rite necessarily in Canada formally. There's no governing body in Canada for that. It's really a group of degrees that exist all over the world, and they have been somewhat organized like the York Rite in the US to match the structure of the Scottish Rite, which you were probably introduced, which I'm sure Ron Taylor introduced very well last week. Having said that, a lot of the information that and topics that you experience in the Scottish Rite are presented in the York Rite bodies, and I will use that term, in a different way. So, but because of, I'm going to do a little refresher on Freemasonry itself here, just to lead up to why the difference perhaps between the approaches between the Scottish Rite and the quotes York Rite. You've probably heard this information before, but I'll go over it again and hopefully it'll be a nice little refresher. So Freemasonry is an initiatory society focused on the growth of every member with a view for improving the greater human condition in every dimension. Morality, We spend a lot of time on the relationship with others, especially our brethren and companions, etc., in Freemasonry. We really focus on learning and evolving as a human being. We actually, believe it or not, encourage science, philosophy, and tradition all in one body, if you will. And the degrees of Freemasonry, we really cover the ground from the physical nature of the world and your existence in the world to the mental and to the spiritual. But all in all, one of the words that we like to use and what I think really distills the goals of Freemasonry to its absolute minimalist and sharpest focus is wisdom. That, for me, is what Freemasonry delivers to the world. Now, that's, I should say, and that's not, that's not, sorry, that's not just knowledge. That is the proper application of knowledge. And that takes time to experience and experience to learn. But we help you with that. But it takes a lot of effort. So one of the, you've heard that stuff before, but what you might not have been privy to, or may not have been discussed in the previous sessions, is that we deliver our learning in a special format that is very ancient and very effective. And to some degree, it actually explains some of the secrecy around Freemasonry because it's a very effective tool. So we deliver our education in the form and we deliver our learning framework in the form of something called a mystery school. This is a structure for learning in many ancient traditions found throughout the ancient world for millennia. Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, Rome, all over the world. And in Freemasonry, with our focus on the symbols of building, geometry, and architecture, we like to call out, for instance, the school of that famous geometrician Pythagoras, who you see a picture of here. So, what are the characteristics of the mystery school? So, a mystery school usually conveys its information in small independent groups. The learning is delivered over time. You move on when you're ready. It's an active, participatory, multi-sensory experience. There's often an element of surprise. So there's a build-up in the framework, in the session, and you get, symbolically hit on the side of the head by a brick, if you will. And hopefully you experience some kind of epiphany when that happens. The delivery is by a story, delivered from memory. There's a heavy reliance on symbols to convey the meaning, as some of the concepts, such as morality, are beyond words and may take on a very individual and intimate and personal meaning to you. And the subject is life, basically. And this is a very effective learning technique, which was used very pervasively for thousands and thousands of years. And not only is it beneficial to the person who's receiving the teaching, it's actually very beneficial to the people who are conferring the information. We who are giving people degrees in Freemasonry are always learning things that we missed and reinforcing the teachings that we learn through this process. So the foundations of Freemasonry are really in the Craft Lodge. In the US, they call it the Blue Lodge. You may have heard that term, and that's the foundation of Masonry. And all Freemasons participate in the first 3 degrees in the Craft Lodge. These are the entered apprentice degree, which is really teaching you the basics of organizing yourself and the structures of life, the basics of life. For instance, structure, work hard, the golden rule. The fellowcraft degree is really meant to impress upon you that you should pursue higher learning. For instance, classical education is one thing that you should continue to keep looking at. And the third degree teaches you that life is impermanent and you should utilize every bit of your life and make sure that you're never wasting a second. And throughout all of these classes or degrees, there's a common background of understanding that you are here to be of service to your fellow man, you're here to love your fellow man and woman, and you are to pursue an upright life. And the story of the story motif of these degrees of the Craft Lodge is the building of the Temple of King Solomon. And symbolically, you are that temple. But I've been using the word lodge, and a lodge is not a building. That is, the building is a Masonic hall or a temple. The lodge is what we call a group of Freemasons. We organize in groups like this in all of our orders. And it is that small and cohesive group I mentioned when I was describing the mystery school. The lodge is the Buddhist Sangha, your church congregation, your neighbors and friends on this Masonic journey. And everybody is there to support each other and have fun. And the intent is to reinforce and help each other on this journey and to merge with your everyday life, because at the end of the day, this is intended to actually be a way of life. The lodge is led by its officers, and everybody gets a chance to be an officer because that is also part of the learning journey. I can tell you that I've founded my own company. I've been a vice president in multiple companies, and you know the learning of management in the officer chairs of a Masonic lodge and through Freemasonry is some of the best management teaching I've ever received. It's intended that way, that everybody is supposed to be equal in Masonic lodge, and it's a way of growth for you. The functions and the roles of officers are symbolic and part of the learning structure. And the lesson, like I said, the lesson in leadership is immense, gradual, and reinforced by long-term participation in both the meetings and in delivering the education. So great, you've got the Craft Lodge, you've become the Master Mason, which is supposed to be the highest level that you can attain in Freemasonry. So then what are you looking for? Well, actually, you don't have to do anything. You can just stay in the Craft Lodge and go through the chairs or not go through the chairs. And you can have a very enjoyable journey and really have a great time for the rest of your life. But that doesn't mean that there isn't more. But you must be a Master Mason, as I think somebody has already said, no, actually it wasn't said tonight, but it was said last week. To do anything else, you have to be a Master Mason before you can go on to any of these other degrees. So now that you are firmly ensconced in a vital group of brethren that you treat you better than family, perhaps, and support you and choose to grow. Here's where Freemason really starts to differ from other fraternities and other service groups. And oops, sorry, went the wrong way. And we encourage the lay person to explore every facet of the human condition. And in many ways, that growth is a spiritual direction. And that is one of the principal objects of the degrees beyond the Craft Lodge of Freemasonry. So as you can see in this diagram, there are many nooks and crannies in this Masonic experience, and I apologize for this particular diagram. because it's very detailed, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but you can see on the right hand of the screen, you were talking about the Scottish Rite. This is the Scottish Rite, and it is structured as one specific body. There are other branches up in the middle, but this is the York Rite on the left-hand side. And then there are some of these other bodies, for instance, down here. There are groups that are dedicated to sharing the experience with your spouses, like the Eastern Star. There are women's Freemasons, which aren't on this particular graph, and co-ed masonry. They're all outside of the Grand Lodge of Ontario, of Canada, in the province of Ontario. Demolay for young men, Rainbow Girls, the Shrine for Charity and Social Outreach. But in what many consider the ultimate journey, North American Freemasonry provides these two paths to exploring spirituality and meaning: the Scottish Rite and the York Rite. I emphasized North America, and I actually like this particular diagram of this better because it simplifies it. I emphasize North America because the organization of these groups looks a little different in the rest of the world. Not such a framework, a direct framework that in the old days you used to have to follow sequentially. In the Scottish Rite, you do still. In the York Rite, you don't necessarily have to. I'll talk about that a little later. By and large, the syllabus of this journey is very similar on both sides, but the approach is a little bit different, and that is the reason for some of the buildup that I've been talking about. For instance, last week you were presented. You had a big presentation, or last month you had a big presentation on the Scottish Rite, which some people term the University of Freemasonry, and that's a good term, as the manner in which the Scottish Rite conveys the concepts of spirituality while containing a lot of the same content and historical context as the York Rite. The manner in which it's delivered is more of what you're used to in a classroom setting. It's a progressive course delivered on stage. The York Rite is structured similarly in chronology and intended teaching, but it retains that mystery school structure by and large for conveying and exploring these topics. Small lodge-like groups with officer leadership and regular meetings. They're usually not lodges, although some of the orders are in lodges, but they may be called chapters or councils or conclaves. And they preserve the mystery school methodology of participatory degree conferment by memory, and officer progression, regular meetings, and enhanced intergroup camaraderie. And this difference between the Scottish Rite and York Rite is a great thing. You can participate in both if you like, and experience both styles of learning and get the benefit of both styles. I haven't joined the Scottish Rite myself yet, but I do intend to do so someday. Certainly, the mystery school methodology is great. It's fantastic. I mean, I'm sold on it, and have experienced those epiphanic episodes that I've discussed. But it is time consuming. And in fact, it's so time consuming, as I said, there has been a change up in recent years that allows members to pick the sequence with which they want to participate in each order and which ones, except for one, which is the Royal Arch. This is the first and mandatory order of the York Rite, the Holy Royal Arch. It's the centerpiece of two orders that are dubbed capitular Freemasonry. And the first three degrees, of course, are called craft Freemasonry. This degree has a bit of a special place in the constellation of what are called, in aggregate, the concordant bodies. The Grand Lodge of England was officially organized in 1717 and went along very happily for some time But in the early days, there was a constant introduction of new and interesting degrees to be worked all over the country. And, that's what we call participating in a degree in Freemasonry, working a degree, all with a view for delivering a new aspect of experience and learning. But eventually, there were reformers who had views on what should or not be included in Freemasonry, with the people who wanted to simplify and limit the number of degrees gaining the upper hand and limiting the number of degrees to 3. And this caused a significant number of lodges to break away as they wanted to work the material that is part of the Royal Arch degree that we have today. The group that broke away called themselves the Ancients, and the group that stayed was called the Moderns. And this schism lasted for about 50 years or more, maybe 60 years, until 1813, when the two parties got back together in something called the Unification. And the new body was called the United Grand Lodge of England, and that's what it's called in England to this day. And the new body practiced ancient, free, and accepted masonry. But a funny thing happened in this unification. They all agreed that there were only 3 degrees in craft masonry, and that the Master Mason was the highest degree. But because of the Royal Arch being brought back in this unification, everybody agreed that the completion of the Master Mason degree was the Royal Arch degree. So that set up kind of a unique setting, and is why today the Royal Arch is considered an independent body of Freemasonry rather than a concordant body. And that for many, many years until just recently, if you were going to wear any symbol of any other Masonic body in a craft lodge, you could only wear the Royal Arch jewel. Now you can, of course, wear the Scottish Rite. But that is why the Royal Arch is in the York Rite a necessary and mandatory part of the path. So in North America, it's a bit different than what is practiced in the United Grand Lodge of England. You can go right from being a Master Mason to be a Royal Arch Mason in England, but we added a couple of degrees to go through before you get there. Degrees that help clarify the Royal Arch degree and its education and prepare a Freemason to get as much understanding from the degree as possible. The Mark Mason degree, which is a standalone order in the UK and is known as the Fun degree, is the first step. The next degree is the Most Excellent Master degree, and then the Royal Arch degree is the final degree in the set and is called the Supreme degree. Although you have to be a Master Mason to join the Royal Arch and have the Mark degree conferred on you, even in the UGLE where the Mark degree is its own order, the personality you assume when taking the Mark degree is that of a fellow craft Freemason. You've not become a Master Mason and you're still learning things. That is in the story, if you will, that is being conferred in the Mark Mason degree. The group that you belong to in this degree is a lodge still, and the officers have the same names as those of the regular craft lodge. The theme is that of the Temple of King Solomon is still being built, and there are lessons to be learned here, and you must be reminded of, since you're probably quite proud of yourself for being a Master Mason and might think that you know everything. In fact, one of the main lessons to be learned in this degree is one of humility and a reminder that there is always something else to learn. You may think you're hot stuff as a Master Mason, but you shouldn't. Don't get trapped in routine, in dogma, and self-importance. Don't just go through the motions. I can tell you these things in a very academic way, but in the mystery school, you inhale and live these lessons. Therefore, learn them on an entirely different level. Thus, I don't feel bad about introducing this much information to you in this presentation. Now, the virtual past master degree, I'm going to mention that, and everybody in who's already in the Royal Arch is probably going, why is he going to talk about that? Well, this is a little oddity that I'll let you in on for interest's sake, but also a little bit of a revelation in terms of how we used to enter into these bodies. So this degree is no longer conferred in Canada, but it is conferred in the United States. And this gentleman is a worshipful master in the US. And just for your own interest, you see he's wearing a top hat. He's got a bit of a different apron than what you might have seen in pictures from Canadian Freemasonry. In the US, a worshipful master wears that kind of a top hat. It's kind of interesting. In fact, if you are a Canadian visiting a Royal Arch chapter in the US, and we do that a lot, you cannot go in to the chapter and into an open chapter until you've been put through this degree. And for that reason, when Canadians go down to visit US chapters across the border, it's usually done in a very organized fashion. And the Americans will put the Canadians through a virtual past master degree for a little bit of fun. So it's a unique experience. The intent of the virtual past master degree was to emphasize that although somewhere along the path, the requirement for being a worshipful master before you could go into the Royal Arch was relaxed, it is still to be emphasized that these degrees are meant for the thoughtful, dedicated, and well-prepared Freemason. For this reason, as the mystery school is pursuit of spiritual insight, the greatest effect is achieved through an epiphany experienced at some point in the degree, as I said, and that is generally achieved only in those best prepared. The setting of the most excellent master degree, which is the next one after the marked master degree that we confer in Canada, is the completion of King Solomon's temple. And the intent of this degree is really preparation, scene setting for the Royal Arch degree. The temple's completed, and in doing so, it is a vessel for the divine spark, the mystery of life in the universe. And the scene here is the arrival of this incomparable mystery, and you as the candidate are welcome to as an integral participant in this completion. But you still have to work to internalize this. The environment that you're working in is still a lodge, and you are still a brother, and the officers still bear the names of the lodge officers. Now we come to the supreme degree, the Royal Arch. So like the marked degree, once more, you experience the impedance of life. And as they say, diamonds are formed from coal under millions of years of pressure, and then they need to be cut and polished. So we've talked about the Temple of Solomon, the magnificent Temple of Solomon that you've been introduced to throughout all of your degrees, from the craft through the marked, through the most excellent master, has been destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and a 70-year exile in Babylon is endured by the Israelites, who were then freed by King Cyrus the Great, who's the founder of the first Persian Empire. Now you return to do your homework again, with the job not just being presented with the idea that there's a divine nature of the universe and life, but now you're presented with concepts and symbols that with your journey to date and contemplation, you will hopefully start to feel and understand for yourself. Very carefully, we don't promote any type of doctrine or dogma. That's up to you to determine, probably in alignment with your chosen faith. But we try to open your mind to experience it, and therefore better understand it. As you can imagine, the goal of feeling and understanding to the best of your ability the nature of the Supreme Being is why we call this the Supreme Degree. An important part to remember here is that you must still bear in mind that the important lesson of the marked degree is humility with respect to your perspective on this subject. The body of the Royal Arch is now a chapter and not a lodge, and you are now a companion. And the names of the officers are completely different. In fact, I think you've already heard the equivalent of the worshipful master is the first principle, and that is what Steve Young is in our chapter this year, and even through COVID. And the grand second principle of the grand chapter of Canada in the province of Ontario, Right Excellent Companion George Fairburn, is what is this is the second principal, and he's actually on this call, putting lots of pressure on me. So something a bit unique to how we do Royal Arch in Ontario is that when you become the first principal of any Royal Arch chapter, you actually are eligible to be a member of what's called the High Priesthood. And that happens to you when you go to the Grand Chapter convocation, and usually is conferred upon you right there. In Ontario, we do something different, and we have our own order for the Order of the High Priesthood, and it's reserved for those who have attained the office of First Principal in a Royal Arch chapter. And anybody in this order is not just a brother or a companion, but is considered an anointed high priest. The story in this order is the bold rescue by Abraham of his brother Lot, who had been taken captive in Sodom. And one of the key lessons of this degree is the bold defense of your family or tribe, if you will. And Abraham, and it's called the Order of the High Priesthood because Abraham was anointed by Melchizedek, the king of Salem, otherwise known as Jerusalem, who was the high priest, who was a high priest of the one high God. Royal and Select Masters, moving up the path, up the ladder, is an important order that unfortunately is too often passed by nowadays in the rush by many members to get to the more well-known order of the Knights Templar, which you may be familiar with. Royal and Select Masters in general focuses on the background around the Royal Arch degree, the recovery from the catastrophe of the destruction of the temple, which is the Royal Master, actually from a catastrophe, not the destruction of the temple. That's the Royal Master degree. The goals and intentions of the legendary Grand Masters and how they implemented the framework of Freemasonry. That's the Select Master degree. And the causes of the destruction of the temple, the fall from grace and the long road back, is aided by divine inspiration, is the super excellent master degree. And a reminder of a more ancient catastrophe and recovery is the Royal Arch Mariner degree. So this is an interesting addition to the Royal and Select Master degree. It's its own order in the UK. But this is interesting because a lot of early symbolism and allegory in Freemasonry was associated with the life of Noah, and until it was switched to being around the building of the Temple of Solomon. So the Royal and Select Masters has some of the richest and most inspiring ritual in the York Rite, and fills in many of the blanks for from the preceding degrees. It's also called the cryptic rite, as it centers on a vault or a crypt, which is a legendary focus in these types of discussions, even in the Knights Templar, if you will. Another order, the Order of the Secret Monitor, is oriented around the story of David, who became the king of Israel, and Jonathan. And the lessons that it teaches are about self-sacrifice, mutual trust, watchful brotherly care, warning in time of danger, solace in time of sorrow, and skillful and effective friendly advice in every circumstance of life. So these are more of the everyday types of characteristics and things that you think more in general as you associate with Freemasonry. Allied Masonic degrees is an interesting order because Freemasonry has always been a perpetual source of degrees, and these are often pruned and literally discarded. But Allied Masonic degrees is a project that is sought to rehabilitate a number of these degrees for the ardent student of Freemasonry. And there is a lot of stuff in here that's really interesting. I have not yet joined it, but hope to someday. getting towards the end, guys. The chivalric degrees, chivalric Freemasonry. So we talked about craft Freemasonry. We talked about capitular Freemasonry. The chivalric degrees are centered around the noble concept of the knight, which has always held some deep allure for people of European background. I won't go into these degrees as they're really worth a night of their own. And I was mentioning to Angus that he might want to do that. In the chivalric degrees, religious doctrinal influence has actually seeped into Freemasonry a bit, oriented around the Christian faith. The first degree that you see on the left is the Knights Templar, which is the most famous and most mysterious of the crusading orders. And in the late 18th century, Freemasons formed the Order of the Masonic Knights Templar. And like I said, I think that probably deserves a night all to itself. And the final order that I'll talk about here is on the right, the Red Cross of Constantine. So that is an invitational order, usually that you can just apply to join an order. That one you get invited to. And that's the story of the revolves around the conversion of the Emperor Constantine to Christianity in the early 4th century AD. That really is the primary path of the York Rite. I tried to show how it complements the Scottish Rite. It has a lot of similar content. It's just delivered in a different way. And it really builds on the foundation of the of craft Freemasonry to go in more of a spiritual manner that is complementary to whatever faith that you have. It doesn't replace it, just enhances it and opens your mind to being sensitive to a lot of these topics and concepts. Certainly, I can tell you there is enough to keep you engaged for your entire life. And that's it for my presentation.
Thank you very much, Gord.